Grant Whitmore woke up just before sunrise, the kind of hour where guilt usually slept and consequences hadn't arrived yet. The hotel suite was still dark, curtains half open to a gray Manhattan sky. The city looked quiet from 40 floors up, clean and forgiving, as if nothing wrong had happened beneath it. Grant lay still for a moment, listening to his own breathing, to the faint hum of traffic far below, to the soft sound of someone shifting beside him. Ivy Caldwell stirred, her arm draped across his chest, her hair spilling over the white sheets. A night ago, that arm had felt like escape. Now it felt like weight. Grant checked his phone. No missed calls, no messages. Good, he thought. Claire must still be asleep. He slipped out of bed, careful not to wake Ivy, and crossed the suite. His tailored suit lay folded over a chair, his Rolex placed neatly beside it, exactly where he had left it. Control. Order. That was his life. One mistake didn't change that. By the time he reached the penthouse an hour later, the city was fully awake. The private elevator opened directly into the living room, as it always did. Grant stepped inside, already rehearsing the version of the morning he would sell. Late meeting. Overseas call. Same excuses. Claire never pushed too hard. But something was wrong. The apartment was silent, in a way that felt intentional. No soft jazz from the speakers. No coffee brewing. No movement. "Claire?" he called out. Nothing. He set his briefcase down and loosened his tie. That was when he saw it. On the dining table, centered carefully on the marble surface, sat a small velvet pouch. Dark blue. Expensive. Grant frowned and stepped closer. Inside were diamond earrings. Not Claire's. He knew every piece of jewelry she owned because he had never bought her many. These were newer, sharper, flashier, the kind Ivy wore. His pulse spiked. Beside the earrings lay a single sheet of paper, folded once. Grant picked it up, his fingers suddenly unsteady. 4 lines. Written in Claire's handwriting. No anger. No accusations. Just this. "I returned what was never mine. What you took from me, I'm done chasing. Don't look for me. Goodbye." Grant's throat tightened. He looked around the penthouse again, really looked this time. Claire's coat was gone. Her laptop, the framed wedding photo from the hallway wall. For the first time in years, Grant Whitmore felt something he couldn't negotiate his way out of. Fear. And somewhere deep down, he knew this wasn't a threat. It was an ending he could never undo. Grant stood in the middle of the penthouse, the note still clenched in his hand, as if letting go would make everything real. He walked toward the bedroom first. Claire's side of the bed was untouched. The pillows were arranged neatly, too neatly. She hadn't slept there. The closet told the rest of the story. Her everyday clothes were gone, not everything, just enough. Practical choices. Shoes missing, her passport drawer empty. This wasn't impulse. Grant moved faster now, opening cabinets, checking the guest room, the home office. Her MacBook was gone. The leather notebook she never let anyone touch was gone too. Even the spare phone she kept just in case had vanished. Only her wedding ring remained. It sat on the bathroom counter beside the sink, placed carefully, not tossed. Grant picked it up. For a second, a memory flashed through his mind. Claire years ago, laughing softly as he slid that ring onto her finger, promising stability, partnership, forever. Promises felt cheap now. His phone buzzed. He flinched, then grabbed it. Ivy. He let it ring out. Grant sank onto the edge of the bed and ran a hand through his hair. Claire disappearing wasn't part of the script. She was supposed to argue, cry, demand explanations. She was supposed to wait while he decided what came next. She always waited. He opened his laptop and checked his calendar. Meetings, calls, a charity board lunch at noon. Life was supposed to continue. He told himself this was just drama, a phase. Claire would cool off. She had nowhere to go, no money of her own, no allies left. Except that thought didn't sit right. Grant opened his email and searched her name. Nothing recent. Then he noticed something else. A notification from compliance, time-stamped early that morning, an automated message, routine. He almost ignored it until one line caught his eye. Account access modification completed. His stomach tightened. Grant clicked into the firm's internal system. His credentials still worked, but several folders were grayed out. Restricted. Administrative changes he hadn't authorized. That wasn't possible. Claire had never had clearance. Not officially. He dialed his assistant. Straight to voicemail. He tried again. No answer. Outside, the city buzzed with its usual confidence. Inside, Grant felt the walls closing in. Claire hadn't just left him. She had stepped away with purpose, with timing that felt surgical. He looked back at the empty closet, the missing laptop, the ring on the counter. This wasn't revenge. This was preparation. And somewhere between the silence and the locked files, Grant began to realize Claire hadn't walked away empty-handed. She had walked away ready. Grant sat alone at the dining table, the diamond earrings still lying between his hands. He hadn't moved them since he first saw them, as if touching them again would contaminate something fragile. Morning light spilled across the marble surface, catching the sharp edges of the stones and sending cold flashes across the room. They were unmistakable. Ivy's. Grant remembered the night too clearly now. Ivy standing in front of the mirror in the hotel suite, fastening those exact earrings with a satisfied smile. She had joked that diamonds made everything feel more permanent. Grant had laughed, distracted, already half-dressed, already thinking about getting home before sunrise. He swallowed. Claire had found them. Somehow, or maybe Ivy had left them here deliberately. The thought made his jaw tighten. Ivy liked to mark territory. But Claire had never played those games. Grant picked up one earring and turned it between his fingers. It was heavier than he expected. Real. Expensive. The kind of object that didn't lie. Objects didn't explain themselves. They waited for you to catch up. His phone buzzed again. Ivy, once more. This time, he answered. Did you take something from the apartment? He asked, without greeting. A pause, then a laugh, light, careless. Relax, Ivy said. Why would I do that? The earrings, Grant said. Did you leave them here? Another pause. Longer. I might have taken them off earlier than I remember, she said. Why? Did Claire find them? Grant closed his eyes. She's gone, he said. The line went quiet. What do you mean, gone? Ivy asked, her voice suddenly sharper. I mean she left, Grant said. She packed. She took documents. She took things that matter. Ivy exhaled slowly. Grant, don't overreact. She'll come back. Women like her always do. That sentence landed wrong. Grant stared at the empty chair across from him, where Claire used to sit every morning with her tea, scrolling silently, always observing, always listening. She left the earrings, he said. On the table, with a note. Another silence, this one heavier. Grant, Ivy said carefully, I don't think that's normal. Neither did he. After the call ended, Grant walked through the penthouse again, slower this time, noticing details he had ignored for years. The books Claire had arranged by subject, the file cabinet she insisted on keeping locked, the printer she used late at night when she thought he was asleep. She hadn't been passive. She had been patient. Grant opened the trash drawer under the desk. Empty, too empty, no shredded paper, no discarded drafts. Whatever Claire had taken, she had taken cleanly. He returned to the table and placed the earrings back into the pouch, his hands trembling now. For the first time, the truth crept in. Claire hadn't left because she was hurt. She had left because she was finished preparing. And Grant was only just realizing the diamonds weren't evidence of betrayal, they were proof of how carefully she had planned his fall. Grant read the note again, slower this time, as if different words might appear if he stared hard enough. I returned what was never mine. That line bothered him more than the rest. Claire had never spoken like that. She used to say marriage meant sharing, building, standing on the same ground. This sentence sounded detached, almost legal, like a final accounting. He folded the paper carefully and slipped it into his jacket pocket, an instinctive move, as if the note were evidence that needed to be controlled. Then he stopped himself. Control was the illusion that had gotten him here. Grant poured himself a glass of water, though his throat was dry. He tried to remember the last real conversation he and Claire had shared. Not logistics, not schedules, not polite exchanges over dinner, something honest. Nothing came. She had grown quieter over the past year. He had mistaken that silence for acceptance. He remembered how she used to watch him when he spoke, her expression unreadable, her questions fewer, her comments sharper but less frequent. At the time, he had welcomed it. Fewer questions meant fewer complications. Now he understood the shift. Claire hadn't been withdrawing. She had been observing. Grant sat down at the desk in the home office and opened the drawer where he kept old contracts. The drawer stuck for a moment, then slid open. Inside, everything was aligned with obsessive precision. Claire's work. Her signature touch. He pulled out an old folder, labeled with a deal from 8 years ago, one that had nearly ruined him if it had gone wrong. He flipped through it, his pulse quickening. Notes in the margins. Calculations. Risk assessments. All in Claire's handwriting. Grant's jaw tightened. He remembered that deal clearly. How he had taken credit for the strategy. How Claire had stood beside him during the fallout, quietly smoothing over relationships, quietly fixing what he broke. Another line from the note echoed in his mind. What you took from me, I'm done chasing. For the first time, Grant wondered if Claire hadn't meant the affair at all. What if she meant the years, the ideas, the credit, the career she had dismantled piece by piece so his could survive? His phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't Ivy. It was a calendar alert he didn't recognize. A reminder titled simply, Final Transfer. Grant frowned and opened it. No details. No explanation. Just a date. Today. Grant felt a cold heaviness settle in his chest. Claire hadn't left chaos behind. She had left a sequence, one he was only now stepping into, blind and unprepared. He looked around the office, suddenly unsure of which decisions had ever truly been his. And as the clock on the wall ticked closer to the hour, Grant realized the goodbye note wasn't closure, it was a countdown he had already lost time on. Grant didn't leave the apartment that morning. Instead, he sat in the home office with the old folders spread across the desk, each one pulling him backward through a version of his life he had carefully rewritten in his own favor. The deeper he dug, the more uncomfortable the truth became. Claire had been everywhere. Every major deal that saved the firm in its early years carried her handwriting in the margins. Not flashy notes, not emotional ones. Just clean, precise logic. Warnings he ignored. Solutions he later claimed as instincts. She had calculated risks while he chased applause. Grant remembered those years differently. He remembered himself as hungry, brilliant, self-made. He remembered Claire as supportive, cautious, sometimes annoyingly skeptical. But looking at the evidence now, that story collapsed. There was the East Coast acquisition he nearly botched. Claire had stayed up 3 nights straight building alternative exit strategies. When the board panicked, Grant had walked in calm, confident, armed with her work. Applause followed. Articles were written. His name rose. Claire's didn't. He found an old email chain he barely recalled. A compliance issue. His signature forged by an associate. Claire had flagged it immediately, warning him it could destroy everything. Grant had dismissed her concerns as paranoia. 2 days later, the issue exploded. Grant had been prepared to let the associate take the fall. Claire stepped in, instead. She reframed the narrative, redirected responsibility, absorbed the damage quietly. Her reputation never recovered. His sword. Grant closed his eyes. That was when her career ended. Not abruptly, slowly. Invitations stopped coming. Consulting offers dried up. People who once sought her advice stopped calling. And he let it happen. Not out of cruelty, out of convenience. Claire had once told him, "I don't need credit. I just need us to be safe." It's matter. He had heard that as permission. Grant stood and walked to the window, staring out at the city. He had built his identity on the idea that he was the engine, the risk-taker, the visionary. Now he saw the truth with painful clarity. He had been the face. Claire had been the spine. His phone buzzed with another system notification. This time, it wasn't subtle. Asset reclassification completed. Grant's breath caught. He rushed back to his desk, logging into the firm's dashboard again. More sections were restricted now. Entire portfolios moved into holding status. Legal flags appeared beside projects that had once been untouchable. Claire hadn't just prepared an exit. She had prepared a reckoning. Grant felt something shift inside him then. Not anger. Not fear. Regret. Deep, suffocating regret that came too late to fix anything. And as another folder locked itself before his eyes, Grant understood the cruelest truth of all. Claire hadn't taken revenge. She had simply stopped protecting him. Ivy Caldwell woke up late that morning, wrapped in silk sheets, sunlight cutting through the high-rise windows of her apartment. She smiled before she even opened her eyes. The night before replayed in her mind like a victory lap. Grant's attention, his promises, the way he had looked at her as if she were a reward he had finally claimed. She reached for her phone. No message. That was fine. Grant was busy. Powerful men were always busy after complicated mornings. Ivy told herself she understood his world better than most women ever could. She padded into the bathroom, studying her reflection. Youth. Confidence. Momentum. Everything Claire lacked. Ivy smirked. Claire Whitmore had been an obstacle, nothing more. A placeholder wife who had overstayed her usefulness. Ivy had seen women like her before, quiet, aging, invisible. They clung to loyalty like it was currency. Men like Grant eventually traded that in. Her phone buzzed. Grant? Ivy answered instantly. Good morning, she said softly. His voice was clipped, controlled. Did you tell anyone about us? Ivy frowned slightly. Of course not. Why? She left, Grant said. Claire, she's gone. Ivy paused, then laughed lightly. Grant, that's dramatic. She probably went to cool off. No, he said. She planned this. Ivy rolled her eyes. You're giving her too much credit. She didn't build your firm. You did. Grant didn't respond. Ivy's smile tightened. Look, she said, shifting tone. This might actually work in our favor. Clean break, fresh start, people will understand. I don't think you understand, Grant said. She took things. What things? Ivy asked, suddenly alert. Documents, access, control. Silence stretched between them. Ivy straightened. Grant, you told me she was harmless. She was, he said quietly, until she wasn't. 2. The call ended abruptly. Ivy stared at her phone, irritation creeping in. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. She had imagined sympathy, brunches, whispered congratulations, invitations that suddenly included her name. Instead, unease settled in her chest. Later that afternoon, Ivy stopped by a boutique on Fifth Avenue, trying to shake the feeling. Retail therapy always helped. She reached for her card at checkout. Declined. She tried again. Declined. Ivy laughed nervously. That's strange. The cashier waited politely. Ivy checked her banking app. Her account balance hadn't changed, but a notice flashed at the top of the screen. Temporary hold pending review. Her pulse spiked. She called her banker. Straight to voicemail. By the time Ivy stepped back onto the street, the city no longer felt welcoming. The looks she received felt different, curious, measuring. She typed a message to Grant. I think something's wrong. No response. For the first time, Ivy felt it real fear. Because winning was only satisfying when someone was still playing. And Ivy was just beginning to realize she had stepped into a game where she was never more than a pawn. Grant arrived at the office earlier than usual, hoping routine might ground him. The building lobby smelled of polished stone and expensive coffee, the familiar comfort of power and predictability. For years, this place had responded to him. Doors opened, people listened. This morning, something felt off. The receptionist avoided his eyes. His assistant's desk was empty. Grant walked straight to his office, setting his briefcase down with more force than necessary. He logged into his terminal, fingers tight on the keyboard. Overnight, notifications flooded the screen far more than usual. Red icons, system flags, legal alerts. One subject line froze him. Notice of preliminary review, external audit. Grant's heart slammed hard against his ribs. An external audit didn't just appear. It had to be triggered, requested, approved, and most importantly, justified. He opened the notice. The language was cold, precise, almost surgical. A review of legacy transactions, risk exposure analysis, compliance reassessment tied to historical oversight. Historical. Grant leaned back slowly. These weren't new deals, they were old ones. Deals from the years Claire had been most involved. His phone rang. This time, it was Marcus Hale, a senior partner who rarely called directly. Grant, Marcus said without greeting. What the hell is going on? Grant swallowed. What do you mean? I mean, compliance just locked 3 of our largest funds, Marcus snapped. Investors are calling. Someone filed for a review using internal documentation we thought was buried. Grant closed his eyes. Who filed it? That's the problem, Marcus said. It wasn't anonymous, it came through a legal proxy. Clean, legitimate, impossible to dismiss. Grant's mind raced. Whose name? There was a pause on the line. Claire Whitmore, Marcus said. Or rather, her former credentials. The words landed like a punch. She doesn't work here anymore, Grant said, his voice hollow. No, Marcus replied, but whoever set this in motion knew exactly how the system works. They knew where the bodies were. They knew how to make it look procedural. The call ended with no reassurance. Grant stared at the city outside his window, watching traffic crawl through the streets below. He had always believed audits were for sloppy firms, careless executives. Not him. Not his. Another alert flashed on his screen. Investor meeting rescheduled. Then another. Board session moved to emergency status. Grant's phone buzzed again. A message from an unknown number. By the time you read this, the first door will already be closed. No signature, no explanation. Grant felt his breath shorten. Claire hadn't just pulled strings. She had aligned timing, leverage, and silence into something unstoppable. This wasn't chaos. It was design. And as Grant realized the audit was only the beginning, a single terrifying thought took hold. Claire hadn't exposed him yet. She was just clearing her path to do it properly. Grant sat through the emergency board meeting with his hands folded tightly on the table, forcing his expression into something neutral. Around him, faces that once reflected admiration now carried unease. The room felt smaller than it used to, the glass walls less transparent, as if secrets were pressing inward. The head of compliance cleared her throat. We've completed an initial review of the documentation submitted, she said carefully. The materials are extensive. Grant didn't speak. She tapped her tablet, and the screen behind her lit up. Timelines, transaction trees, archived emails pulled from long-forgotten servers. Every item was labeled, cross-referenced, and time-stamped. This level of preparation suggests someone with deep operational knowledge, she continued. Not an outsider. A murmur spread across the table. Then came the moment Grant had been dreading. One slide changed, revealing a familiar name in bold at the bottom of the screen. Claire Whitmore, former strategic consultant. Grant's jaw tightened. That's not possible, one board member said. She left years ago. Yes, the compliance officer replied, but her access credentials were never fully revoked. They were downgraded, not erased. Whoever initiated this review knew that. Grant felt heat rise in his chest. He had signed off on that downgrade himself, dismissing Claire's role as obsolete. At the time, it had felt generous. Now it felt catastrophic. She no longer represents the firm, Grant said evenly. No, the compliance officer agreed. She represents the truth of its past. The words hung heavy in the air. Another board member leaned forward. Is she accusing us of wrongdoing? No, the officer said. She isn't accusing anyone. She submitted records and requested independent evaluation. The conclusions will speak for themselves. That was worse. Grant understood the danger immediately. An accusation could be attacked, discredited, buried. Evidence simply waited. The meeting ended without resolution. No shouting, no drama, just a quiet consensus that the situation was beyond control. As Grant returned to his office, his phone buzzed again. A message from Marcus. She's not trying to destroy you, it read. She's letting everyone see who built you. Grant stared at the words until the screen dimmed. He opened his desk drawer and pulled out an old photo he had forgotten was there. Claire and him, years ago, standing in a cramped office, surrounded by papers and cheap coffee cups. She was smiling then, proud, hopeful. He slid the photo back into the drawer. For the first time, Grant admitted the truth to himself. Claire hadn't come back for revenge. She had come back for recognition. And as her name echoed through boardrooms she was never invited into, Grant realized the woman he erased was about to be impossible to ignore. Grant stayed in his office long after everyone else had left. The lights of Manhattan glowed through the windows, sharp and indifferent, mirroring the tension building inside his chest. He had spent his life mastering pressure, bending it to his will. Tonight, it pressed back. He opened a secure folder Marcus had quietly forwarded him after the meeting. No commentary, no warning, just files. Grant recognized them immediately. Incident reports, legal drafts, Internal emails marked confidential. The year everything nearly collapsed. Back then, a junior partner had manipulated numbers on a cross-border deal, masking losses just long enough for Grant to secure new capital. When regulators sniffed around, panic had set in. Careers were on the line. Prison wasn't impossible. Grant remembered the night clearly. Claire had sat across from him at the kitchen table, calm while he spiraled. She reviewed the evidence, mapped the fallout, and then said something he had never forgotten. "If this hits you directly," she said, "the firm dies. Everyone loses their jobs. There's another way." He hadn't asked her what she meant. Not really. The files now told the rest. Claire had drafted a narrative that shifted accountability onto her consulting role. She framed it as a failure of oversight, not intent. Technically true, strategically devastating to her. She signed statements Grant never would have survived signing. She withdrew from the industry quietly, citing ethical differences. No lawsuit, no noise. Grant kept everything. The firm recovered. His reputation soared. He told himself it was a mutual decision, a sacrifice she chose. Now, reading the documents years later, the lie collapsed. Claire hadn't chosen anything. She had been cornered by loyalty. Grant scrolled further. A final email, never sent. To be clear, Claire had written, "I am doing this so the firm survives. I expect no protection after this. Only that you don't pretend it didn't happen." Grant's hands trembled. He remembered how quickly he had moved on after that. New partners, new deals, new attention. Claire faded into the background like an inconvenient chapter. Until now. A knock echoed faintly through the office. Grant looked up, startled. His assistant stood hesitantly at the door. "There's something else," she said. Legal just flagged an inquiry. Someone requested formal acknowledgement of prior misattributed liability. Grant's blood ran cold. From who? She hesitated. From a restructuring attorney representing a private client. Grant already knew the name. Claire wasn't just revealing the truth. She was correcting the record. And as Grant finally understood the cost she had paid to save him, one terrifying realization settled. In this time, no one was going to stand in her way. The collapse didn't arrive with sirens or headlines. It arrived quietly. Grant noticed it first when his access badge failed at the elevator. He tried again, slower this time, as if patience might convince the system to recognize him. The red light blinked back, indifferent. He stood there for a moment, surrounded by people who pretended not to see. Inside his office, the damage continued unfolding in controlled silence. Emails from investors were no longer requests. They were statements, carefully worded, distanced, legal. "We are reassessing exposure. We are suspending further involvement pending review. We appreciate your past leadership." Past. Grant loosened his tie and sank into his chair. His phone buzzed constantly now, but none of the names were the ones he needed. No regulators yet, no press. Just the slow withdrawal of confidence, the kind that kills reputations long before careers officially end. He tried calling Marcus. Straight to voicemail. Grant opened the firm's dashboard again. More red markers. Entire divisions marked under evaluation. A line of text at the top of the screen froze his breath. Interim leadership structure pending board confirmation. Interim. That word meant he was already being replaced. Grant leaned back and stared at the ceiling, his mind racing for solutions. He had survived worse, hadn't he? Market crashes, hostile takeovers, public scrutiny. Every time, he had negotiated his way out, but there was nothing to negotiate with now. Facts didn't bargain. He checked the time. Claire's calendar reminder echoed in his head again. Final transfer. At precisely 3 p.m., another notification appeared. Ownership realignment executed. Grant's chest tightened painfully. He clicked through the report, scanning numbers he had once known by heart. Minority holdings had shifted. Silent partners emerged from nowhere. Old clauses activated. All legal. All clean. He wasn't losing everything. He was losing control. Grant stood abruptly and walked to the window. Below, the city moved on. Deals closed. Lives continued. No one paused for his unraveling. For the first time, he understood what Claire must have felt all those years ago, watching her relevance quietly stripped away while the world carried on as if nothing had changed. His phone vibrated again. One new message. Unknown number. You always believed power came from being seen. I learned it comes from being prepared. No name. Grant didn't need one. He closed his eyes, a hollow ache spreading through his chest. This wasn't punishment, this wasn't revenge. This was consequence. And the worst part was knowing it was deserved. As Grant opened his eyes to a future he no longer controlled, one truth settled in with brutal clarity. Claire hadn't taken his life apart. She had simply stepped aside and let it fall on its own. Grant learned where Claire was by accident. He was standing in the hallway outside the boardroom, waiting to be told whether he was still welcome inside, when he overheard two junior partners whispering near the coffee station. "She's in Copenhagen," one of them said quietly. "No way," the other replied. "Why there?" "Private restructuring conference. Invite only. Apparently she's advising one of the keynote investors." Grant froze. Copenhagen. Not Paris. Not London. Not anywhere flashy. A city chosen for work, not escape. That detail mattered more than he wanted to admit. Back in his office, still technically his, though it no longer felt that way, Grant pulled up the conference site. The speakers list was discreet. No headlines, no bios that screamed importance. But there it was. Claire Whitmore. Independent strategic advisor. No reference to him. No reference to the firm. No reference to the scandal quietly unfolding back home. Grant stared at her name longer than he should have. The title was modest, almost understated, but the people listed around her were not. Global funds, institutional investors. Names that didn't waste time on nostalgia or personal drama. Claire hadn't resurfaced to explain herself. She had resurfaced to work. Grant sat back, a strange mix of anger and disbelief tightening his chest. While he was scrambling to hold on to fragments of control, Claire was already building something else. Somewhere else. Cleanly. His phone buzzed. This time, it was Ivy. "Why didn't you tell me?" she demanded the moment he answered. "My accounts are under review. My name is being dragged into things I don't understand." Grant closed his eyes. "Because it's not about you." "That's easy for you to say," Ivy snapped. "I'm being frozen out. People aren't returning my calls." Grant said nothing. "You promised me this was temporary," she continued. "You said she was finished." Grant ended the call without responding. For the first time, he saw Ivy clearly. Not as a partner, not as an escape, just collateral damage in a collapse much larger than either of them. Later that night, alone in the penthouse that no longer felt like home, Grant poured himself a drink and stood by the window. He imagined Claire walking through a foreign city, confident, focused, unburdened by him. She wasn't hiding. She was advancing. And that realization hurt more than the loss of power, more than the scrutiny, more than the fear of what came next. Because it meant the center of gravity had shifted. Grant finally understood the truth he had avoided since the morning she left. Claire hadn't disappeared. She had moved somewhere he could no longer reach. Claire noticed Matthew Ross before he noticed her. He stood near the edge of the conference hall in Copenhagen, not posturing, not networking loudly, just observing. That alone set him apart. Most people in the room were eager to be seen. Matthew had always preferred to understand first. Claire felt her chest tighten, a reflex she hadn't expected after all these years. She hadn't told him she would be here. She hadn't told anyone. Yet somehow, he was. "Still choosing the quiet corners," Matthew said when he finally approached, his voice calm, familiar in a way that cut deeper than surprise. Claire smiled faintly. "Some habits survive everything." Matthew studied her face, not rudely, but carefully, as if checking whether the woman he once knew was still there. She was older now, sharper, more contained, but her eyes were clear. "You look lighter," he said. "I am," Claire replied simply. They walked toward the coffee station together, the hum of high-level conversations surrounding them without touching them. Matthew didn't ask about Grant. He didn't mention New York. He didn't bring up the scandal that everyone here pretended not to know about, while knowing everything. That restraint was why she trusted him. "I heard whispers," Matthew said after a moment. "A restructuring inquiry. Historical liability corrections." Claire raised an eyebrow. "You always did read between lines." Matthew gave a small smile. "You always counted on that." They sat at a small table by the window, Copenhagen's gray harbor stretching out beyond the glass. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Matthew leaned back. "You know they're panicking, right?" Claire nodded. They should? If you tell X. You didn't just submit records, he continued. You activated clauses no one remembered existed. Claire folded her hands. They remembered. They just assumed I wouldn't use them. Matthew's gaze sharpened. Grant assumed a lot of things. Claire didn't respond. Why now? Matthew asked quietly. Why not years ago? Claire looked out at the water. Because back then, I still thought saving him meant saving myself. Matthew absorbed that. And now? Now I know better. Has announced it. Matthew exhaled slowly. They're going to push back. Hard. I know, Claire said. That's why I needed you. That got his full attention. I didn't come here by accident, Matthew said carefully. When your name crossed my desk again, I wanted to be sure it was really you. It is, Claire said. And I'm done standing alone. Matthew held her gaze for a long moment, something unspoken passing between them. Not romance, not yet, something steadier. Alliance. Then let's finish what they thought you never would, he said. Claire nodded once. For the first time since she left, she felt it fully. The ground beneath her feet was solid again. And as Matthew opened his briefcase to reveal documents Grant had never known existed, Claire understood this wasn't just her comeback. It was the moment the truth finally gained a voice. Matthew laid the documents out slowly, one stack at a time, as if pacing the truth mattered. Claire watched him work, recognizing the method. Matthew never overwhelmed people with information. He let it sink in, piece by piece, until resistance collapsed under its own weight. These, he said, tapping the first folder, are original transaction logs from the early expansion phase. Not summaries, not reconstructions, originals. Claire nodded. Grant always believed those were gone. They were, Matthew replied, from the firm's servers, not from private archives. I have 4-4, 18B. He slid another folder forward. Handwritten notes, Claire's notes, dated, signed. These establish authorship, Matthew continued, not just contribution, decision, authority, strategy, risk mitigation. Claire inhaled slowly, seeing her own handwriting preserved so carefully stirred something unexpected in her chest. For years, her work had existed only in memory, unacknowledged and dismissed. Grant told the board he was the architect, she said quietly. Matthew's mouth tightened. He told the board what benefited him. He opened the final folder. Inside were sworn statements. Not accusations, not emotional accounts, just factual timelines that aligned perfectly with the documents beside them. This, Matthew said, is what changes everything. Claire leaned forward. Because it proves intent? Because it proves reliance, Matthew corrected. The firm relied on your expertise while publicly erasing your role. That's misattribution. In some cases, it's fraud. Was have it. Claire felt a chill pass through her. And Grant? She asked. Matthew met her eyes. Grant didn't just benefit, he consented, repeatedly. Claire closed her eyes for a moment, steadying herself. She had known this intellectually, but hearing it spoken aloud, stripped of emotion, made it heavier. What happens next? She asked. Matthew exhaled. Next, these are submitted to 3 separate authorities. Independently, no single point of pressure. No easy suppression. Claire nodded. And the firm? They'll fracture, Matthew said calmly. Not dramatically, slowly, the way things fall apart when the truth replaces convenience. Claire leaned back in her chair, a strange sense of calm settling over her. She had imagined this moment for years, feared it, postponed it. Now that it was here, it didn't feel like vengeance. It felt like closure. Matthew gathered the folders again. Once this moves forward, you won't be able to take it back. Everyone. Claire met his gaze without hesitation. I don't want to. Matthew paused, then said softly, You know this will cost him everything. Claire nodded once. It already did. He just didn't notice. Outside, the harbor lights flickered on as evening settled over the city. Claire stood, slipping on her coat. For the first time, the weight she'd carried wasn't on her shoulders. It was finally where it belonged. And as Matthew sealed the evidence that would rewrite years of lies, Claire understood the most powerful truth of all. What was built on silence always collapses when someone finally speaks. Grant had always believed public appearances were armor. If you stood tall under chandeliers, shook the right hands, smiled for the cameras, people assumed stability. Power lived in perception. and tonight's charity gala was built entirely on that idea. The invitation had arrived that morning, embossed, formal, impossible to decline. A high-profile fundraising event at one of Manhattan's most prestigious venues. Donors, executives, board members. The kind of night where rumors were softened by champagne and confidence. Grant saw it as an opening. If he showed up calm, composed, unshaken, maybe the narrative would slow, maybe doubt would creep in, maybe people would remember who he was supposed to be. He dressed carefully, choosing the tuxedo that had once drawn compliments without effort. In the mirror, he adjusted his cufflinks and practiced a neutral expression. Not defensive, not desperate, just steady. The ballroom buzzed when he arrived. Crystal lights reflected off polished floors, and familiar faces turned toward him with polite smiles that didn't reach their eyes. Conversations paused, then resumed, quieter than before. Grant moved through the room anyway. He shook hands, accepted nods, laughed when appropriate. Every gesture felt heavier than it used to, as if gravity had shifted and no one had bothered to warn him. Halfway through the evening, he noticed the whispers change tone. Not about him, about her. Grant followed the direction of their glances toward the entrance. At first, he didn't recognize the woman walking in. She moved with calm precision, wearing a dark, understated gown that didn't beg for attention. No dramatic jewelry, no forced elegance, just presence. Then she turned slightly. Claire. The room reacted before Grant did. Conversations stalled. Phones discreetly slipped into hands. Eyes widened, not with shock, but with recognition. Claire Whitmore didn't scan the room. She didn't hesitate. She walked forward as if she belonged there, as if she had always belonged there and simply hadn't bothered to attend before. At her side was Matthew Ross. Grant's chest tightened painfully. Claire stopped near the center of the room, greeting a senior donor with a warm handshake, then another, and another. People Grant had once introduced her to as my wife now greeted her as something else entirely. An equal. Grant stood frozen, his rehearsed confidence evaporating. This wasn't a confrontation. This wasn't chaos. This was worse. This was legitimacy. He watched as Claire spoke quietly with a board member who had refused his calls all week. Watched as Matthew leaned in, adding context, shaping perception with the same ease Grant once admired in himself. Grant finally understood the trap. The gala wasn't his shield. It was her stage. And as the room subtly reoriented around Claire, Grant realized the night he hoped would save him was about to confirm what everyone already sensed: his era was ending, and hers had already begun. Claire felt Grant's eyes on her long before she saw him. She didn't look his way at first. That was intentional. The most powerful shift in the room wasn't her presence, it was her indifference. For years, she had oriented herself around Grant's reactions, his moods, his approval. Tonight, she moved without reference to him at all. That alone unsettled people. Claire accepted a glass of champagne from a server and listened as a donor spoke about long-term impact investing. She responded thoughtfully, asking questions that cut straight to substance. No small talk, no performance. Matthew stood beside her, adding context only when necessary, reinforcing her authority without overshadowing it. Across the room, Grant watched every exchange. He noticed how people leaned in toward her, how they nodded, how their posture shifted unconsciously, signaling respect. This wasn't sympathy. This wasn't curiosity. This was alignment. A woman from the board approached Claire cautiously, her smile measured. "It's good to see you again," she said. "I didn't realize you were back in the city." "I'm not," Claire replied calmly. "Just passing through." The woman blinked, recalibrating. "Well, your timing is interesting." Claire smiled politely. Timing is everything. The words traveled faster than she intended. Grant felt them land like a verdict. He finally moved closer, unable to stay invisible any longer. As he approached, conversations thinned. The space around Claire opened slightly, creating a subtle clearing that felt intentional, almost ceremonial. Claire turned. Their eyes met. For a split second, Grant expected anger, accusation, pain. Instead, he saw clarity. "Claire," he said, his voice quieter than usual. "I didn't know you'd be here." "I know," she replied evenly. Matthew stepped half a pace forward, not protective, simply present. Grant swallowed. "We should talk." Claire tilted her head slightly. There's nothing left to clarify. That's not true, Grant insisted, the edges of control slipping. You're doing this publicly. No, Claire corrected. I'm existing publicly. The truth is doing the rest. A few guests nearby pretended not to listen. No one walked away. Grant glanced around, suddenly aware of how exposed he was. You could have handled this privately. Claire's expression softened, not with mercy, but with finality. I did. For years. Silence settled between them. Grant opened his mouth to speak again, but Claire had already turned away, resuming her conversation as if he were no longer relevant. And just like that, the room followed her lead. As Grant stood there, unseen for the first time in his life, he realized the most devastating part of the night wasn't what Claire said, it was how easily everyone accepted that she no longer needed him at all. The moment didn't come with a spotlight or a microphone. It came quietly, the way irreversible things usually do. Claire was mid-conversation with a representative from a European investment group when a subtle shift rippled through the ballroom. Phones buzzed almost in unison, heads tilted, expressions tightened. Matthew glanced at his watch. It started, he said softly. Claire nodded. She had expected this. The timing had been deliberate down to the minute. Across the room, Grant felt it before he understood it. A board member stepped away from him abruptly, checking her phone with a frown. Another avoided eye contact entirely. The confidence Grant had worn like a tailored jacket all evening began to feel threadbare. A large screen near the stage flickered to life, interrupting the soft music. At first, it looked like part of the program. A logo, neutral colors, clean design. Then the title appeared. Independent Findings. Historical Liability Review. A hush fell over the room. This wasn't gossip. This wasn't rumor. This was formal. Names appeared. Dates, transactions, long buried under success stories and press releases. The language was clinical, impossible to misinterpret. Responsibility mapped clearly. Decisions traced back to their origin. And then, unmistakably, it showed her name. Claire Whitmore, primary strategic author. A murmur spread, not of scandal, but of realization. Grant stared at the screen, his chest tightening as his own name followed hers. Not as the architect, as the beneficiary. The distinction was devastating. A voice came through the speakers, calm and measured. Not Claire's, not Matthew's. An independent auditor. This review confirms that material credit and liability were misattributed over a period of several years. Corrections are now underway. No accusations, no drama, just truth. Grant felt the room turn, not against him in anger, but away from him in clarity. This was worse. Anger could be managed. Clarity could not. Claire stood still, hands relaxed at her sides. She didn't look at the screen. She didn't look at Grant. She looked forward. People began to approach her, one by one. Not to comfort, to acknowledge, to recalibrate. A board member cleared his throat near Grant. We'll need to speak tomorrow, he said formally, about transition. Transition. The word echoed. Grant tried to move, to speak, to do something. But there was nothing left to say that hadn't already been disproven. Claire finally turned, her gaze meeting his from across the room. No triumph, no bitterness. Only truth, fully exposed. And as the gala continued without him, Grant understood the final cruelty of it all. The truth hadn't humiliated him. It had simply replaced him. Grant left the gala early. No one stopped him. No one asked if he was okay. The valet handed him his keys with professional politeness, the same way one might assist a former guest who no longer mattered. The night air felt colder than it should have, sharp against his face as he stepped onto the sidewalk. Inside the car, the silence was suffocating. His phone vibrated once, then again. Messages stacked up, but none of them offered reassurance. The board chair's name flashed briefly on the screen, followed by a short, devastating line. We'll be announcing interim leadership in the morning. Grant didn't reply. By the time he reached the penthouse, exhaustion weighed on him like lead. The place looked exactly as it had weeks ago, expensive, pristine, hollow. He poured himself a drink, then set it down untouched. Alcohol wouldn't dull this. He opened his laptop. The news had already begun circulating. Not sensational headlines, not scandal, something far worse. Firm announces governance review. Ad. Strategic credit reattribution underway. Founding narrative re-examined. Grant's name appeared less and less as he scrolled. When it did, it was framed carefully, almost kindly. Former managing partner. Beneficiary of early strategic decisions. Transitioning role. Transitioning out, he thought bitterly. Another notification arrived. This one, from legal counsel. Effective immediately, your decision-making authority is suspended pending review. Suspended. Grant leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. He had always believed downfall looked dramatic, raised voices, slammed doors, public disgrace. Instead, it arrived like this. Administrative. Bloodless. Final. Across the city, Ivy sat alone in her apartment, refreshing her email obsessively. Her invitations had stopped. Her name, once whispered with curiosity, now triggered polite distance. The world she thought she had entered quietly closed its doors. And Claire? Grant didn't know where she was at that moment. But he knew one thing with painful certainty. She wasn't watching this unfold with satisfaction. She was already past it. The next morning, Grant stood before the board one last time. No accusations were thrown, no insults exchanged. Just formal language and careful phrasing that stripped him of everything he once controlled. When he walked out, his badge deactivated behind him with a soft click. That sound stayed with him, because for the first time, Grant Whitmore understood what real consequence felt like. Not punishment, not revenge. Replacement. And as the doors closed behind him, Grant realized the cruel balance of it all. The same silence he once forced Claire to live with had now become the only thing left waiting for him. Claire didn't plan to see Grant again. That mattered to her. The meeting only happened because Matthew insisted there were a few legal acknowledgments that required signatures in person. Neutral ground, short, clean, final. They chose a quiet conference room overlooking the river. Glass walls, no luxury, no audience. The kind of space designed to remove performance from the equation. Grant arrived first. He looked older. Not physically, his suit was still tailored, his posture still disciplined, but something essential had thinned. The confidence that once filled every pause had drained away, leaving a careful restraint behind. When Claire entered, Grant stood instinctively. She nodded once and took the seat across from him. For a moment, neither spoke. "I didn't know how to reach you," Grant said finally. His voice was steady, but it lacked authority. Every channel closed at once. "That was intentional," Claire replied. Grant swallowed. "I deserve that." The admission surprised them both. He looked down at his hands. "I spent years believing I earned everything, that if you stayed quiet, it meant you agreed." Claire didn't interrupt. "I told myself you were fine," he continued, "that you didn't want more, that you were content being and supportive." He let out a breath. "I see now how convenient that belief was." Claire folded her hands calmly. "You never asked what it cost." Grant nodded slowly. "I know." Silence settled again, heavier but honest. "I'm not here to apologize," Grant said after a moment. "Not because I don't regret it, but because I know apologies don't restore years." Claire met his gaze. "That's true. I also know," he continued, "that none of this was about punishing me." "No," Claire agreed. "It wasn't." Grant hesitated. "Then why let it go this far?" Claire's answer was immediate. "Because stopping halfway would have meant protecting you again." That landed hard. Grant leaned back, absorbing it. "I never meant to erase you." Claire's expression softened slightly, not in forgiveness, but in understanding. Intent doesn't undo impact. Matthew slid the final document across the table. Grant signed without resistance. When he stood to leave, he paused at the door. "For what it's worth," he said quietly, "you deserve to be seen." Claire nodded once. "I am." Grant left without another word. Claire sat still for a long moment after the door closed, listening to the river move outside. She didn't feel victory, she felt release. But as Matthew gathered the papers, his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, then at Claire. "It's done," he said. "But there's something else." Claire raised an eyebrow. "What?" Matthew hesitated, then smiled slightly. "Someone wants to meet you about what comes next." And for the first time since she walked away, Claire felt the future open, not behind her, but directly in front of her. The first thing Claire reclaimed wasn't money. It was her name. Within weeks, formal statements were released quietly, professionally correcting years of misattribution. Industry publications updated their archives. Panel invitations arrived addressed to her directly, not as an extension of anyone else. Her work was no longer a footnote, it was a foundation. Claire accepted selectively. She didn't rush. She didn't chase relevance. She chose projects that aligned with the life she wanted now, not the one she had sacrificed before. Advisory roles, strategic oversight, positions that valued precision over visibility. The money followed naturally. Assets once tied up in legal ambiguity were returned. Deferred compensation reclassified. Silent equity positions unlocked, not as a windfall, but as restitution. Clean, undramatic, deserved. Claire placed most of it into a trust. Security, not indulgence, had always been her measure of success. But the real change came in quieter moments. Mornings without dread. Evenings without tension. A calendar that belonged entirely to her. Matthew remained a steady presence through it all. Never rushing, never assuming. He stood beside her in meetings when asked, stepped back when not. There was no debt between them, no imbalance. Just trust built slowly, honestly. One evening, after a long day of negotiations, they walked along the river near Claire's temporary apartment. The city lights reflected on the water, softened by distance. "You don't seem surprised by any of this," Matthew said. Claire smiled faintly. "I stopped being surprised when I realized I was never powerless. Just quiet." Matthew nodded. "What do you want now?" Claire considered the question carefully. No one had asked her that in years, without attaching expectation. "I want a life that doesn't require me to disappear to survive," she said. "And I want to share it with someone who sees me, not uses me." Matthew stopped walking. He turned to face her fully. "I see you," he said simply. The words weren't dramatic. They didn't need to be. Months later, there was no grand announcement, no spectacle, just a small ceremony by the water, attended by people who knew the full story and didn't need it explained. Claire wore a simple dress. Matthew stood beside her, calm and certain. Grant didn't attend. He wasn't invited, not out of spite, but because that chapter was finished. As Claire looked out at the faces around her, she felt something settle into place, not triumph, not validation. Peace. She had lost years, she had lost trust, she had lost herself for a time, but she had gained something far more lasting. A future built on truth. And as Claire stepped forward into a life she chose freely, she understood the final justice of it all. The woman who once walked away with nothing had returned to claim everything that truly mattered. A year later, Claire stood in a quiet kitchen filled with late afternoon light, her hands wrapped around a warm mug she hadn't rushed to finish. Outside, the world moved at a pace she no longer felt obligated to match. Her life was no longer divided into before and after. It was whole. The work she did now mattered not because it carried prestige, but because it carried intention. She advised companies that valued long-term stability over reckless growth. She turned down offers that felt familiar in the wrong way. Power no longer tempted her. Alignment did. Matthew watched her from the doorway, a faint smile on his face. Their relationship had never been built on rescue or repair. They met each other as complete people, aware of each other's scars, without trying to claim them. That was the difference. Claire still received messages from time to time, indirect updates, fragments of news she hadn't asked for. Grant had relocated. He consulted quietly now, far from the spotlight. Ivy had disappeared from the circles she once chased, her name fading as quickly as it had risen. Claire didn't feel satisfaction at that. She felt distance, the kind that meant the story no longer belonged to her. On a cool evening near the water, Matthew reached for her hand. "Do you ever think about how close you came to staying?" he asked gently. Claire considered it honestly. "I think about how easy it would have been," she said, "and how expensive." He nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. They didn't build their life loudly. There were no declarations meant to prove anything, just small, deliberate choices made every day. Trust instead of fear, honesty instead of convenience. Claire had once believed justice arrived with noise. She knew better now. Justice arrived with balance. She had her name back, her work back, her voice back. And more importantly, she had something she never expected to find on the other side of loss. Peace. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Claire leaned into Matthew's shoulder, feeling the steady certainty of a life that didn't require her to shrink to survive. Somewhere in the distance, the city lights flickered on, indifferent and beautiful. Claire smiled softly. She hadn't won. She had arrived. And in choosing herself without bitterness or regret, Claire discovered the rarest reward of all, a future that finally chose her back. So that's how the story comes to a close. And if you're still here with us at this moment, still listening, still feeling something, then maybe this story touched your heart in a way you didn't expect. Because, at its core, this wasn't just a story about betrayal or success. It was about what happens when someone stops abandoning themselves. One of the oldest Stoic teachings says, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." Claire didn't win because she fought harder or shouted louder. She healed because she chose clarity over chaos, truth over comfort, and dignity over fear. Many of us stay too long in places where we are unseen, uncredited, or quietly shrinking, telling ourselves it's loyalty or love. But as another Stoic reminder goes, the soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. When you finally choose yourself, not with bitterness, but with calm resolve, life has a way of rebalancing what was once unfair. If this story resonated with you, maybe it's because you're standing at your own quiet turning point. Take that as a sign. You don't need revenge. You don't need applause. Sometimes, the deepest healing comes from simply stepping forward and letting truth do the rest. If this story spoke to you, please like the video, share it with someone who might need it, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us keep telling stories that heal, not just entertain.